Hi, today we're going to learn a little bit about Saturn, and we're going to start with a short clip of a brain pop video.
Dear Tim and Moby, how did Saturn get its rings? From Ariel. Yeah, it's all about the rings. Some have called the rings of Saturn the most beautiful phenomenon in the solar system. In pictures, they look like solid bands, but they're actually composed of small particles orbiting the planet. The dust and bits of ice and rock that make up the rings look solid from far away, and they refract the sun's rays to produce all those pretty colors. Even though the rings around Saturn are more than 270,000 kilometers in diameter, the rings are usually no more than about a kilometer thick on average. The rings form bands that are lettered in order of discovery. Where the ice and dust came from in the first place is a bit of a mystery. They may be left over from Saturn's formation, or possibly the remnants of a moon or asteroid that was somehow torn apart. Speaking of moons, scientists have discovered about 60 moons orbiting Saturn. Some of these seem to be important in keeping the rings in place. These are called shepherd moons. Saturn is also the mother planet of the moon Titan, the second largest moon in the solar system, and one of the only moons we know of with a significant atmosphere. Yeah, okay, back to Saturn. Saturn is a gas giant, and the sixth planet from the Sun. Its gaseous atmosphere consists of mostly hydrogen and helium, along with trace amounts of methane, sulfur, ammonia, and water vapor. Go deeper and you'll find a layer of molecular hydrogen, then liquid metallic hydrogen, and finally a small rocky core. Saturn may be 100 times as massive as the Earth, but all that mass is pretty spread out, giving Saturn a really low density. In fact, if you threw Saturn into a giant lake, it would float. All that's pretty cool, but Saturn's spectacular rings have earned it the name the jewel of the solar system. Yes, I get it.
So let's review some of the basic info about Saturn. It is the second largest planet next to Jupiter. It is, like Jupiter, mostly made of hydrogen and helium, and that's why we call them the Jovian planets. They're all very similar to Jupiter, being made of hydrogen and helium. But there's also methane, ammonia, and ethane in the upper atmosphere, which is why we see those different colors and those kind of banding of clouds there. And as was mentioned in the brain pop, Saturn is the only planet that is less dense than water. So if we had a ginormous bathtub, we could float Saturn in it. Another similarity to Jupiter is that it also gives off more energy than it receives. We think that this extra energy is actually coming from helium falling out of the atmosphere and sinking into the core. So again, very similar to Jupiter, we think that it's kind of still forming. What's interesting about Saturn is that it has the most violent winds of any planet. We see winds of about 10,000 miles per hour at the equator. It has a very cold surface temperature because it is so far from the sun, and it also spins very quickly like Jupiter. Not quite as quickly though. Its day is about 11 hours long, and its year, because it's so far away from the sun, is about 20.5 Earth years. Let's take another look at another video. Let's take a look at another video clip recently in the news about some of the violent winds at the poles.
Cassini has been in orbit around Saturn for 9 years, and we've been following this hexagon which surrounds the North Pole. It's bigger than 2 Earths, and it's a wandering jet stream. But it's been winter in the north, so we have not been able to see what's at the center of the hexagon. But now it's spring, and what we found at the center of the hexagon is a Saturn hurricane. This is a view from directly over the North Pole, which was made possible by the orbit of the spacecraft, which is now taking us over the poles. The winds are flowing at 300 miles an hour, which is 4 times hurricane force. The fluffy white clouds in the center are about the size of Texas. We can use special filters to measure the heights of the clouds. The red are low clouds and the green are high clouds. We call it a Saturn hurricane because it has the eye, it has the high winds, but it's different from an Earth hurricane because it's locked to the North Pole. And unlike a terrestrial hurricane, there's no ocean underneath. And that's one of the puzzles we're trying to figure out.
Probably what Saturn is most well known for are its ring system. All of the gas giants do have ring systems, so Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune all have rings, but Saturn's are definitely the largest. There are more than 1,000 rings, but you might hear a different number in different places because it really depends on how you categorize them. They are only a few hundred meters thick, so they're very, very thin compared to the size of Saturn. And they're made of different icy particles and also dust. So most of the particles are pretty small. The largest ones are just going to be several meters long. Now on to Saturn's moons. Currently, the count of discovered moons of Saturn is 62, and the largest of which is Titan. And Titan is a very interesting planetary body. It has an atmosphere so thick that light can barely get through it, so we don't get to see the surface unless we look at it with radar. But what we have seen of Titan tells us that it's the most Earth-like world found to date. On Titan, we find rivers and lakes, but they're not of liquid water like we find here on Earth. They're actually lakes of liquid ethane and methane. And this ethane and methane forms clouds, and so it occasionally rains, but again, it's not water that's raining, it's methane that's raining down. We also see lots of hydrocarbon-rich dunes that are shaped by the winds. Another interesting moon of Saturn is Enceladus, and this is the 6th largest moon. And what's interesting about Enceladus is we're pretty sure that there's water under the icy surface. It's also geologically active, and we've seen cryovolcanoes at the South Pole that eject organically rich material into space. So this is one place where a lot of scientists think that there's some possibility for life under there. Saturn has many other significant moons. There's a few pictured here. You can look up some of these other moons if you're interested in more information. But we see a lot of them are covered with craters and canyons, and we see some similarities with a lot of the other ones to the Earth's moon. Here's a close-up of a few other ones. Now let's talk about missions to Saturn. Probably the most famous and most important mission to Saturn is the Cassini mission, specifically called the Cassini-Huygens mission. And this was launched in 1997, and it was the first to take very detailed pictures of the rings. It entered into orbit in 2004, and it's still gathering data today. So that's it for our video on Saturn. Thanks for watching.